Okay, we should be recording. My name's Alan Hill, as you can see on my little Brady Bunch box. And my background is I used to serve as a workforce center DBOP, which is basically a veterans rep, helping veterans in transition, much like Dave and Steve Kozinski do today. And then also Scott and Zach from MACV. But I currently volunteer through Eagle Group of Minnesota Veterans. That's who's hosting this. And my intent is to help you see things in a different way. So when I give presentations and talks, I like to present things from my, let's call it different perspective. So what I mean by that is I don't tend to look at challenges and problems the same way that most people do. I look at them as opportunities that just haven't been solved. So if you're struggling or have a challenge in job search, I want to hear about it because I want to hear what the opportunity is behind it. It just takes looking at it in a different way usually. Tonight, what I want to talk about is nonverbal communication. So particularly, this is going to be focused on interviews. And you may have noticed that people say an interview is more about your fit than it is about your skill set. So we're talking about the hiring manager interview at this time. That's going to be a question that brings up for me is, how exactly do you fit in an interview? And you may have heard of the phrase nonverbal communication. So I don't have the stats in front of me. I've got on a slide that I'm going to bring up here in a bit. But how you say what you say is more important than the words that you use. And so what that means is, I guess I'll pose it as a question. Have you ever been at a party or networking event and gotten bad vibes from someone, or maybe just not clicked at a networking event and wondered why, or maybe even in an interview, maybe it didn't go the way you thought and the interview was maybe cold to you, and you were wondering what was going on. So recently, my adult niece, she's runs a memory care unit for a 100-bed facility in Colorado. And one of the things she said that was pretty telling to me was, she said that folks that are in memory care, right, they're never going to remember what you tell them. So if you give them a command to, do this or don't do that, or, here's the rules, she says they're never going to remember that. But they'll always remember how you make them feel. And they're going to respond to how you make them feel. And so the question that I brought out of that was, how are you focusing on, in your interview prep, making the interviewer feel about you? So let me first say some assumptions. Yes, you need to be qualified for the job. You won't pass the pre-screening if you're not qualified. So yes, you do need to meet the qualifications of the job. I want to be real clear about that. Except in rare cases, you need to have the qualifications and experience, unless they're going to make an exception, which is very possible. But at the hiring manager interview, it's about your fit. And so defining fit, that includes your, what I call your emotional state or your emotional vibes, as much, if not more so, than your experience and skills. So they want to know how well you are going to fit in with the team, how well you're going to click with maybe the internal customers or even external customers, and how you might resonate or relate to their boss if that situation happens. So let me share my screen with this interesting diagram. Let me get on that first here. There we go. Share screen. I found this diagram some time ago, and it's, I'm going to zoom in on that, I think. This was done by a guy by the name of Robert Pluchik. I probably am bastardizing his name there quite a bit, and I'm sorry about that. There's a link to a Wikipedia page about him. And what he's explaining here in this diagram is there's however many 8 basic emotions. And or feelings that people experience. And if you look at the secondary ring, joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, and anticipation. He said those are the core elements, much like if you're familiar with in design, the color wheel, right? So that color wheel gets used as a palette for mixing and matching colors, opposites and balance and the triangle and everything. And his point is emotions are generally a mix. So you might be feeling a mix of joy and anticipation, or trust and joy. And so the point being is the outer rings there: love, optimism, aggressiveness, contempt, remorse, disapproval, awe. These are the emanations or vibes that we're giving off to others. And what you're looking at on the inner circle, the ecstasy, vigilance, and admiration, rage, terror, loathing, amazement, and grief, those are the intense, that's the kicking it up in intensity level, if you think of it that way. So in other words, joy becomes ecstasy, anticipation becomes vigilance at an intense level, anger becomes rage, disgust becomes loathing, etc. But as you get further out, right, the opportunity for the emotion becomes more diffuse, but also more mixed. So you might be feeling optimistic about your opportunity with an interviewer. But the point being is these are the waves or the vibes that we're giving off in an interview or in any social setting, really. And so the point being is if you take a focus moment before you go into your interview and focus on exactly what you're feeling about the situation, maybe you're feeling a bit of apprehension or fear, right? If it intensifies, maybe you want to focus on changing that to a balance of admiration or joy or anticipation, right? Because the vibe that you give off is going to impact the response from the interviewer. As you can see in the quote there from Brad Sugars, which is a business coach, he says, true communication is the response you get. And what this means is two things. One is, it's not just about what you intended to express. I intended to express optimism, but wound up also expressing aggressiveness, or it was received as aggressiveness by the other party. And so the response I got back was one of disapproval. So the point being is this isn't just about what your state is, it's about how your state impacts the state of the other person and how they interpret your state. And so the point being is let's be mindful of this in an interview. And so how would we do that? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say I asked you, tell me about your last job, i.e., how did you feel about it, right? Right now, you might be experiencing some emotional states somewhere on one of these wheels. But going back to the nonverbal communication, right? It's not what you say, but it's how you say it. Let me give you a few examples here. Let's say you asked me that question in an interview right now, and I said, well, I did learn a lot. That's a completely different emotional state and response from, well, I did learn a lot. Or, well, let's just say I really learned a lot, right? Those are three different emotional responses, but I said the same words. But what was communicated was completely different message in all cases. And so the point being is to focus in on what your emotional response is going to be as much as your verbal response. So I'm going to open this up for discussion, because this is really the important part of this, is where we're going to help each other, is what can we do about it? What are things we can do? Let's say that in your last job, you really did learn a lot in a negative sense, right? And wouldn't it be emotionally honest to share that? Well, sure, that depends. But let's say you didn't want to share that you had a challenging background at your last work environment. How would you get into a state where every time you think about your work environment, it doesn't come across as negative? One thing that I've learned is to take 3 deep breaths. And we're going to try this exercise right now. And so before we do this, before you start breathing in and breathing out, because we all know how to do deep breaths, I want you to think about something that you've had a negative experience with. And it could be your job, or maybe your last job was great and you kind of mourn the loss of it, right? Like it was a great job and then you wish you had it back right now, right? I get that. But I want you to notice the state of how you're feeling about that. And if it was a negative experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be about your last job. Just think of a negative experience, and we don't need to vocalize it or explain it. I just want you to notice what you're feeling in your body, right? Maybe you're feeling a heaviness in the pit of your stomach. Maybe you're feeling, sometimes some people feel like their head is like getting a headache kind of. Maybe your neck muscles are tensing up, right? These are all states that are coming across in your body. And this is why your body language is a big portion of what you're saying. But as you're noticing that, now we're going to do the deep breaths exercise. And then after that, we're going to notice how we feel about that situation, even briefly if it changed. So at this point, everybody, I want you to take 3 deep, relaxing breaths in a slow pace and let it out slowly. So, and we're still thinking about that experience and we're letting the breath out. And then we're going to take another deep breath in. And slowly we're going to let that second breath out. Still thinking about maintaining our thoughts about our last negative experience. Now we're going to take our 3rd deep breath. And now we're going to slowly let it out. And the only point of this exercise is to notice where, when I asked you before, notice where you're feeling the tenseness in your body. Now check in with that same spot and see what you feel. I'm going to give you just a couple moments to focus on that for a second. I'm just going to invite you to notice if it's changed even a little bit. Has the tenseness gone away? Has the nerves gone away? That pit in your stomach thing, right? And so the reason being is what we're doing is we're changing our physiological state to more match a positive frame of mind, so that, as you can see on the nonverbal communication there, the body language starts to resonate and match with our voice tone and our words of what we're saying, right? I loved my last job. So that's one key technique that you can use. Now, of course, you're in an interview. How do you feel about your last job? Oh, yeah, that's not going to be the response that you want, right? Not going to work so well. So my recommendation is to make this part of your interview practice. So you're practicing for all those questions. You know, what are you going to say when you they ask you, tell me about a time when you had a bad customer experience, and they're going to ask you all these, you know, tell me about an accomplishment that you're most proud of, and all these questions. Right? You're practicing answers for that. Practice getting into your emotional state before you go into the interview, or maintaining your emotional state when you get asked challenging questions, like why did you get fired from your last job, right? So focus on doing this before you enter into the interview, right? 3 deep breaths, because that's a nervous time, right? Oh my God, I've got to make or break this thing, right? This is the only interview I've had in a month. What's going on here? I got to get this one. Okay, 3 deep breaths, right? Because your emotional state is going to be more positive communication, and you're going to use that to help. And what this resonates with, or what this does, is it helps the interviewer see you in a more positive frame of mind. When they're asking themselves, will this person fit in with my team or with my company, they're going to see somebody that has a positive emotional state, and they're going to experience that and feel it. And that's going to be a part of their decision-making process. So one quick thing you might think back to is, most of us here have served in the military. You might remember getting ready for a dress uniform inspection. And when we were all standing in formation and, you know, or prepping, right, and walking around, maybe some of us strutted a little bit. That might be equivalent to the experience. What did the change of state have? Well, you physically changed your uniform, but it changed the physiology of your physical state tremendously well. And everybody responded accordingly to that. So at this point, this is the Q&A portion. I'm going to pause the sharing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for discussions and feedback. What sort of things did you learn from this? What sort of things do you want to share? What sort of questions do you have? What did I miss or not make clear?
So, Alan, I'll jump in. I think it's a great topic, and I got a couple of things, and folks chime in if this triggers something in the conversation as well. As first off, just like you're talking about, don't wing it. I know a lot of people go into their interviews and say, all right, I'll just, whatever's asked of me or whatever. This is exactly what Alan's talking about. Your first reaction could show on your face, right? If you don't have a poker face just in general, and someone asks you about your last job and you're like, well, yeah, do the 3 huge breaths. We got the Zen master Alan here, right? Or you're like, ah, right? then it's probably not the, so people that wing it usually become very susceptible. And I can just say, interviewing folks that wing it, you can see that they're very susceptible to showing their true emotions about things, even though they're saying something completely different.
Awesome,
right?
Les.
So prepare, and it might take you a couple of times to be like, my last job was great. Yeah, okay. So practice that if that's really the impression you want to make, or, oh, this job is going to be awesome, right? All right. So the second piece of that is, I do believe that as you're preparing, the words you use and kind of the role you're fulfilling should, kind of help you with your mannerisms, right? So meaning that if you're going out for like a customer service or customer service manager, you want to use words that invoke that trust, explainer type. And because if someone put you on mute, right, and they were like, right, and that's all they could see, they would go, wow, this person is really good at explaining something, right? For something where you have a lot of autonomy, or the hiring manager is going to be like, I'm not going to see this person much. I'm super busy. I got to be able to trust this person, use trust words, right? And I always think about like Xfinity installers. They're in a van by themselves installing stuff. Who knows if they actually are tracked or monitored or so forth? There's got to be a lot of trust there, right? Or construction site managers, or sales folks that go on the road a lot, those road warriors, right? So again, you want to use phrases and stuff like that you can show that, again, you have a plan, you can execute towards this. This is what I do for A, B, and C. This is how, in sales, I go hunt down and I meet with folks. So I always think that that's project managers. Again, those are another ones where you can be very convincing on just going through the steps and being able to articulate that, right? And I think that people have different emotions when they're articulating. I don't know why that is. I like to use my hands when I'm articulating things. Especially sales, right? Now, I would only say the one thing that I would pick up from what you said, Alan, I think you probably agree with it, is that people do hear bits and pieces of what you're saying. And I think that the biggest tall tale is when they stop listening, is when your key words don't match your expressions, right? I'm really excited about this job, and because you're usually thinking about a bazillion job, worry, money, salary, negotiations, right? And it comes out like, it's good, right? That's all you can work out of your face, right? It's good. So again, sometimes rehearsals will do that. Sometimes thinking about maybe the end state, sometimes stop thinking about everything, right? And just focusing on your response helps, because then what you're saying, or the keywords you're saying, doesn't differ from, again, the reaction that you're trying to invoke. And the last piece is, as a hiring manager and interviewing folks, I really do look for different people on my team. And the hard thing is I'm actually looking for different people at different times, meaning that I don't need somebody that's a command type leader all the time. I don't need 20 commanders. I don't need necessarily another role all the time. So I'm looking for that specific behavior or specific mannerism that I could, kind of rely on in each meeting. Say, here's my commander, here's my technical person, here's the person that's super persuasive. I mean, selling snow to Eskimos type person, right? So again, I think that if you put on kind of that role for the quick 20 minutes or an hour that you have, at least they'll give you, a good feeling leaving. I don't know, what are other things? I know that we have a lot of folks that have been in many positions. Agree or disagree?
I like that lesson. Go ahead, Patrick. You were going to say something?
No.
Oh, I was just going to agree. My brother one time said to me, he says, this was a long time ago. We were out in a boating event, and he looked at me and he says, "You're not having any fun, are you?" And I looked at him, I'm like, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Well, you need to tell your face you're having fun." I was like, okay, you're right. So yeah, it's people are making determinations all the time based on what your emotional responses are or aren't. So what other great comments do you have, or questions maybe?
Not nowadays, especially when so many of our interviews are on video chats, one thing that we could do, and I was just thinking about this, because a lot of times we get together and do a mock interview, some sort of rehearsal or prep session, and there would be nothing wrong to record that session and then watch it. And it's always hard to watch yourself. I mean, for any of us that have done these YouTube presentations and stuff, I watch about 2 minutes and I'm like, okay, stop talking, Mike, go away. And so it can be really hard, but it would be really good, because as that mock interviews occurring, exactly what you're thinking in correlation to the face that you're having. It's something that the rest of us, when we're doing a mock interview of somebody to prepare somebody, we can't tell. We can see we can tell what we see, but we can't tell what you're thinking. Right now we have the technology to really be able to match the two, and you can see all the little subtle clues, right, with the shoulder droop or the clenched jaw or whatever, and then be able to kind of adjust or be prepared for that.
That's so true, Mike. Thank you very much. Nicole, you must have some insight to share.
I'm kind of thinking, and almost like a question back to some folks, because I hear a lot of questions around, like, I might not be the most like bubbly or enthusiastic or have like the brightest disposition. How can I still seem engaged and seem like more of that on the positive side of the emotional piece as you're answering questions that might not, it's, tell me about your like most stressful project that you've ever led. You might not be smiling, grinning ear to ear, walking through tough challenges and obstacles. So I think it's okay to recognize that there may be, to Les's point of, you may be touching on some of those keywords of stress or like how do you delegating, prioritization, and it might not all be like butterflies and rainbows, but that's okay. But just knowing that as long as you're hitting those keywords and it's not dwelling on the negative, that you're still being authentic with your answer and with that emotional response. I'd be curious to know if anyone else had similar like feedback or ideas, because I know I'm not always especially in the morning, like the most bubbly person out there. And I'm afraid that if will somebody not think that I'm being genuine or I'm not excited or engaged in the conversation? So I'd be curious to know what others think about somebody who might be more soft-spoken or not as smiley.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I concur. It's important to resonate with what you're saying so that there's what's called congruence, the message and the delivery match. So, and I invite everybody to notice that we're doing this naturally. It's just that in an interview situation, you probably want to be conscious of it, but not to the point of where it's dominating what you're doing, right? You're not, because if you do, like Nicole's saying, right, if you come off stiff or robotic or mismatched, that's going to be worse, right? So definitely match your presentation to your words and the topic.
Hey, Nicole, I can relate to that. Maybe not so much more now. I had to work at it, but straight out of the Marines in the business world, I was definitely the epitome of Marine talk, Marine sitting, Marine eating, Marine conversations. And people are like, what? I don't even know how I got the job, to be quite honest. But there's an instance that I can refer back to that I had an account in logistics, and the executive on the other side, just every chance he was beating us up on price, on performance, on price and performance for just whatever, right? And just like I said, like I'm not I'm not bubbling, let's just face it. But every time I knew I had to get on a phone call or something, I'd go to my buddy and say, hey, tell me a joke, right? Just something, or he'd pull something up on YouTube. Hey, it's a safe space. So, and I don't condone people hurting themselves, but if they do it stupidly and they get caught on video, I'll laugh. And that puts me at least in a mind frame. Again, I'm not going to come off in the meeting, but I can always kind of just tuck that in the back of my mind, just to put my mind at ease. It's probably better to do Alan's 3 breaths than watching people hurt themselves unintentionally and get it on film again. But it brought a smile to my face and kind of levitated those discussions. And then over time, you can see that I am a super bubbly person. So again, if I can change, anybody can.
Nice. We're glad to have your sunny disposition with us, Les. Thank you.
So,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, excellent topic, Alan. This is something that I have, that I've also worked with over the years. Being in the right frame of mind is what I like to say, for the interview, to set the tone for yourself for the interview. One of the things that kind of ties in with your, pre-interview prep, I've always encouraged people to think of things that make you smile. Think of one thing or 3 things, as you're sitting waiting for the interview. Think of 3 things that make you smile, or think of 3 things that make you the most happy in your life. It can be people, can be places, can be activities, but think of those and get yourself in a positive frame of mind. And like Nicole mentioned before, you don't have to be the most bubbly person. In fact, sometimes bubbly can work against you. I think, though, that you need to be positive. You need to be in a positive frame of mind, not necessarily bubbly. It could be any of the positive attributes that were on that wheel. Confidence, optimism, things like that. So I like your 3 breaths that you mentioned, and doing them probably not so obviously, but when they ask you a question, take a moment to reflect and to think about, okay, I'm going to answer this in a positive way. And because it's okay, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand also. It's okay to take a moment after the question before you actually start speaking. And the other thing, I really enjoyed your example, Alan, about the dress uniform inspection. And that is why it's also important to dress up for a phone interview, because it just makes you feel better. It makes you sit taller and answer nicer, or in a better frame of mind. So those are some wonderful points, and thanks for sharing this whole concept tonight, Alan.
No, likewise, David. Those are great feedback. I actually put those options in the chat session for everybody to capture, so you'll have them. Are there other ideas?
I was going to add too. I know the preparation really helps. I remember when I had my networking meeting with my boss, I prepped with Alan the night before or whatever, and you kept mentioning, you said, lean in or whatever. And I was going, what do you mean? He goes, just lean in a little bit. And then, so when I met with my boss and that, I did that. And then later on, he actually mentioned, he said, I could tell you're really enthusiastic about Agile because you're kind of leaning into the table. And I think you can do that on screen to or whatever, you lean in a little more and maybe you seem more enthusiastic that way. I was going like, really be enthusiastic? No, but okay. That's all.
I'll agree with Mike. One of the things I like to do is quite often what I'll do is when the question's asked, I'll kind of sit back, let them ask the question, and then when I go to answer, I lean forward. I don't want to, I'm not going to be doing bobbing back and forth, but a thing of expressing comfort in that is that I'll sit back and I'll shift my seat and listen, and then if I need a second to think about it, I can ask them. So let me see if I hear what you're saying, and repeat it back to them. Gives me a few seconds to the breathing, and I lean back into them, and I also turn towards who's speaking. So you can. It's a little harder now via video, but you can. Exactly what Dave was saying. Get dressed up. Get the monkey suit on, and you're going to do a little bit more, and then just sit there, prepare your room, be prepared, and then be ready to do it. And this is actually kind of talks about some of the stuff that Carrie Elias talks about in our webinar, and she's got a lot of different things, and but I think for a trick for me is exactly what Mike was talking about, that leaning in. Looking at them lean in shows a level of interest in just rigid sitting there all the time.
And Scott, actually, one thing I would add to that, what you're saying is fantastic, but I've been counseling a number of recently separated veterans, and they have to make sure that they don't stare at the one person talking to them. It is not a promotion board. You have to pay attention to the entire room. So, yes, you want to look at the person talking, but don't frighten them.
And that works great too, because if there's 3 people there and the person in the center asks you the question, you start talking to them. But if you look off at the person that's on either side of it and kind of draw them into the question, now they're being drawn into your interview. Because this is something I always talk about. This is your interview. It's not their interview. This is your time. This is your time to shine. So go in with that attitude. Hey, this is mine. I own this. Let's talk about this. I control the situation. Yeah, they're asking me questions, but even if you don't know necessarily the answer, how you answer that you don't know the answer.
These are all great responses, guys. I appreciate your feedback on this. Thank you.
Hey, Alan, one thing that maybe I'll bring up is when you have an interviewer that gives you no emotion or looks like they're bothered by the interview, and whether or not that's that person's disposition. So maybe I'll open up to folks' experience with that is, again, you're looking for some responsiveness, like you're, hey, blah, 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 right? And they're like,
yeah.
So, I mean, I think that may be an area we need to discuss or share some folks' experiences or recommendations on that.
Absolutely.
Maybe if you had done some prep, you would know that this person is very reserved, and if you're very outgoing, might not actually be a good fit on that team. Because I've actually worked with people who they were going into a situation and they were really bubbly and up, and they were told they didn't fit the team. Well, it turned out that the team they were interviewing with was very subdued, very reserved. They got another position in that same company in a really outgoing, bubbly team, and they fit perfectly. So make sure you know about the team.
Stephen, are you talking about me?
Well, I when you were here,
No, that actually, real side note, that actually did happen on my interview for Optum where I work now. Is the gentleman asked me, I basically snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. He asked me, he said, well, okay, so, you know, it seems like you got the job, blah, blah, blah. And then kept talking about customer service. I should have shut my mouth, right? And he says, well, that brings up a question. So you got a customer that's demanding and insists that, you know, he be prioritized. What do you do? Well, you work hard, stay late, deliver extra, right? And his answer was this. Now I'm over exaggerating a little bit, but that was his response. I knew right then, right, that first, that I didn't win the interview anymore. I'd lost the interview. And as Stephen was saying, secondly, I was feeling pretty okay with that. Because if that wasn't going to be a fit, right, if I was going to be constantly challenged for helping, you know, in my nature, which was to help the customer, I can't really say that that's going to be a winning team that I want to be on, right? Well, luck would have it, his peer manager that was there in the interview with him, he actually called me about a week later and he says, yeah, he's not going to go with you. And I'm like, surprise, you know, but he goes, I have a customer service position that I do want to interview you for, and I would like to talk to you about. So, you know, Stephen's making a point about being true to yourself, and I can say from personal experience, that's very relevant and very helpful. All right, I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. Was this helpful for you guys? Was it meaningful? Was there a point that you didn't get covered? Thanks, Al, I appreciate it. Was there a point that didn't get covered that we should have? Or is there questions you have, or is this fully deliverable when you go out into the world of interviewing? Awesome.